So we just saw in my presentation that the state of travel startup funding, all the stats. So I want to start with some follow-up questions about it. So I want to start with Christoph. So I had showed that funding's at its lowest level in a decade, and that there are about half the number of active investors in the market now versus a few years ago. That was a US stat, but I assume the picture is similar in Europe and elsewhere. I mentioned that one of the reasons for optimism is that Lakestar and many other funds actually have raised new funds in this year, very recently, and many are focused on early stage companies. So hadn't raised money in a while. So why that multi-year pause? Why now to raise again? And what's your outlook like on the coming years?
Good. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, thanks, Mike, for the research. I like it. It was really good. Starting with us, Lakestar. So we are just 12 years old, and we have, as you exactly said, we have closed the latest fund generation, which was basically a $600 million fund to invest mainly into Europe. And so why now? I think it's a typical 3 to 4 year cycle. We are raising funds. It's the same cycle as we have done before, so nothing specific. But so funding environment was not as easy as before, but due to our, I would say, anchor investors, we managed the fundraising. And if you ask me about travel tech and how we look at it, maybe we are, let's say, a decent investor into it. We started with Airbnb as in the early days, and we did Get Your Guide, Home2Go, Omio, Limehome, Impala. We did a lot of travel investments in the past, and our view is the following. So we think that, let's say, travel innovation happens in waves, and so if you have a look, happens in waves, and also a lot in Europe. So Europe is dedicated continent for travel tech innovation. So for us, the GDS in the 80s with Amadeus here out of Madrid, they enabled the kind of startup innovation on the OTA side, which we saw in the 90s with Booking and Expedia. That was quite decent, and then we saw the kind of meta search phase, which came 10 years later with Kayak and some others. And then what we saw after that is a kind of vertical OTAs, all B2C, so a lot of B2C innovation in travel. And I think that was quite decent for Europe again. Good companies, but what we identified on our companies we invested in, it needs a lot of funding, a lot of dilution due to building a brand, which we successfully did with the companies. But looking today, I don't know whether we would do it again, to be quite honest, because that is a decent investment. You need to build a B2C brand. On the B2B side, I think there are also a lot of good innovation waves, and Travel Perk here again out of Spain is a good example on a good B2B, let's say, travel tech company. But I'm quite honest, I would love to see the next wave of innovation in travel tech. And I think now we have all the ingredients with LLMs, with AI in general, to see the next innovation wave, but we wouldn't invest in the classical vertical OTA at the moment, because we think the innovation has to come from something else. And if you look, for example, at the latest news on let's say, LLM horizontal, look at Mistral, a company which is just 3 years old and raised 600 million on a 6 billion valuation. So this is the kind of innovation we would love to see, the next bold things, and not just the vertical OTA, which has a sense, but not for us as a VC.
Okay, we'll get into that, where the next big thing might be. But Lucile, 8 Roads hasn't raised a fund in a little while. So are you planning to as well? And then just talk about a little bit about your outlook for the years ahead.
Yes, Mike. Yeah, so first of all, we are fundraising as well. So I think similar to Lakestar, we continue to be very excited about the European opportunity. I think a couple of quick reactions from looking at the data, which is really interesting, is when you look at the drop of funding, I think it's interesting to remember like the whole of VC market was really slow in 2023. So actually, it's not a travel tech specific trend, and it would be interesting to see, you know, I'm not sure actually travel tech dropped more than other verticals, so I think that's an important context. The other thing, and we were chatting before we come here, is at the moment it feels very active. And so it's interesting looking at this data, because in the field, actually at the moment, I think there's quite a lot of activity in the VC market, and my analysis is I think at the moment there's really the have and the have not. And so for a couple of companies, if you have good data, good unit economics, good business models, recurring revenue, there's actually a lot of appetite. So I think what happened is there's been a bit of a flight to quality where investors have gone back to the strongest business models or the more obvious business models. And for those, there is actually a lot of appetite. So it's quite an interesting trend, I think, at the moment.
And I had mentioned, I think interest rates are a big part of that because capital just goes to safer, places in those times. But it sounds like rate cuts might be on the horizon, so that should spur risk capital to start flowing as well again, I would think, right?
For sure, and I think obviously new waves of innovation. So there's always like,
in tandem,
how much capital do we have, but also how much opportunity do we see, and clearly AI, but other things, right? Like I'm sure we're going to talk about climate and others. There are those big trends. I think how Gen Z is changing spending behaviors that I think can give birth to also new waves of very interesting companies.
Yeah. So the conditions are looking better, but Bobby, your first fund's still pretty new. You've made 3 investments so far. I know you're extremely bullish on investing in travel, but you told me that you're seeing companies still struggling a lot to raise lately. So what's your take on the state of things?
I totally agree with what you just said. I think it's a question of wave of innovation. What we are seeing now are quite obvious. There's not so much innovation, and we are expecting to see the new wave. Obviously, I'm extremely bullish on this segment because we are probably the only travel tech fund in Europe. So we believe a lot that travel is going to be, like, probably it's already the case, one of the fastest growing industry. The question is, what's coming next? If it's just like investing in a new OTA, zero interest. And we'll discuss that later, but obviously we'll discuss AI, where huge innovation are happening. But I would like to tell to all the entrepreneurs in this room, the next big wave or the next big innovation should be on sustainability. Sustainable travel is the future of travel.
We could jump to that, actually. I had just a general question about how you view investing in sustainability, balancing kind of responsibility with return. So yeah, I'd love to hear any thoughts on that.
Maybe we have a slightly different view, because for us, sustainability is a horizontal layer, which happens in every vertical. So we would not look, and I think it makes sense how you look at it, but nevertheless, our view is a bit different. We would not pick a sustainability travel company. We would look into sustainability as a horizontal layer, and there are a lot of interesting also AI-related companies we are looking into at the moment. But our view is that, let's say, LLMs, topics like sustainability, these are layers which we are constantly looking across different verticals. So we would not look at the sweet spot of both. From a use case perspective, clearly there is a consumer demand for it, but that would not the way how we would look into it.
I think you're saying you see more disruptive potential coming from these very broad platforms outside of travel, but that will affect travel versus travel-specific solutions. Yeah. Agreement, disagreement?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, for me in travel specifically, what gets me really excited in sustainability is data, because I think there's a lot of noisy, inaccurate, not standardized data to help consumers and potentially corporates compare. So I'm actually quite excited about anyone who's helping bring standardization, and there's a lot of questions: are the offsets even legit? How do we compare those claims, those testability claims? Is there a way to to compare and make that stand out. So I'm actually quite interested
That's what you're
in that.
referring to when you say more visibility into data and cleaning up the data?
Yes, and I think powering, really feeding, if you think about price, availability, that's been the traditional metrics, right? Like, how much is it? Is there room available? But what about the sustainability claims? What about how do they rate? How does this property rate on a scale of 0 to 10? I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area.
Let's take it from another standpoint, regulation. Regulation is pushing hard towards sustainability. And as a VC fund, I see huge opportunity in that. Now, taking back my hat of former consultant at BCG, a lot of companies have stated very strong commitments toward net zero 2050. The point is that there is no solution now. So they have made huge promise, huge commitment with billions engaged. So they will have to find solution. So that's where I really think that there are great innovation, B2B, sustainable travel.
Yes, you see regulation being a tailwind.
Absolutely.
To kind of force behavior.
Absolutely.
And that's true for sustainability, that's true for AI. I was even thinking of asking about digital identity, because as I understand, there's going to be identity solutions even sort of mandated for hotels. I don't know if any of you can speak to that.
The point with, so the regulation on AI is, I mean, the interesting point being here in Barcelona is that Europe is a bit leading this AI Act, which you can see as probably a bad thing for innovation, where we think that it's just creating a framework to ensure that we are using AI in an appropriate way, transparent, fundamental right, and so on. One element that I can share with the room here is that we are very close to the European Commission at ROCH Venture, and especially with the travel team at the European Commission. And they are extremely bullish on travel. They are extremely supportive. It's supportive with funding, supportive with regulation, supporting with advices. So I won't be afraid at all. I would try to compile with the regulation, and I think that's where you can get a lot of outcome.
You see more upside versus a lot of people, I think, see regulation as potential hindrances.
I know this very funny quote saying that US innovate where Europe regulates. I think it's just a funny quote. I think that there are great opportunities, and I think that Europe is leading the right way. You took the example of Mistral, which I'm very happy about because they're French.
Yeah.
But you see, I mean, they are raising a crazy amount of money, and regulation is not stopping them at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about generative AI, so I talked a lot about it in my presentation. So firstly, do you agree with what I said, about the potential disruption of the marketing funnel being impacted, the ever-growing focus of Google on travel, how omnimodal models and autonomous agents will change things, and then how do you make investment decisions in the face of that uncertainty about how the world will change in 5 or 10 years? Anybody?
Yeah, okay, I'm happy to start. When I think about AI, I really think about short-term and middle to long-term. So in the short-term in travel, I see a lot of innovations in the back office. So actually, at least what we see in our portfolio companies and also in companies we talk to is way more opportunities to improve processes. So I'm thinking customer support, you hear about these big airlines now using chatbots or even voice bots that can work with large action models and really fully automate a rebooking experience or a cancellation or change, right? So I'm really excited about that because it's a bit to your point earlier, it's going to make things way cheaper because maybe you don't need 100 people, to help solve issues from customer success. So that's what I see today, much more than the front end. In the longer run, I think there are a lot of interesting questions, right? So on the B2B side, we're used to all these SaaS platforms with a lot of clicking and menus and tabs. Is that even going to disappear? Like, what is the front end of the future? Like, is that just going to be a search bar? Is that going to be no bar? So that I find an interesting topic. And on the B2C side, I think you raise a really good point. I personally also agree that I think the discovery is going to change meaningfully. And if you think about OTAs, metas, everything has been built around search. A lot of the travel has been built around search. And so if search completely changes. I'm really interested to see what that's going to do to the travel world.
As Lucy, decomposing B2C and B2B, I'll take just one point on B2C, which I believe will be a next big wave, is personalization. We have talked about personalization forever. The fact that you and I, we go to Barcelona the same day in the same hotel, but we have different experience, which never really happened. That's where we believe that B2C, AI B2C, we focus on personalization.
Hyper-personalization.
Yes.
You know, people say a lot, right? That one-to-one,
Yeah.
infinite combinations of options that can be specified down to the user, presenting custom content individually, and how that can be done at mass scale. Yeah, Christoph?
Yeah, maybe one comment on Gen AI and LLMs in general. I think there are only a handful of companies who make it horizontal, like Mistral or Aleph Alpha, where we invested into. So I think this market is a super tiny, so heavily funded, but tiny market where I think a handful company will make it. That's why you have to choose your bet really carefully. But on the vertical enabled LLM or AIs, so we always look at it and saying, what is the defendable piece of it by taking out this kind of boosting or let's say innovation element, because it's not really defendable. So I think there needs to be some kind of superpower which is not related on the LLM, let's say, verticalized use case. And that's why we are always careful if someone is coming and saying, hey, this is a transportation company which uses LLM and becomes the champion going forward, because I don't see the defendability of that approach.
Yeah, speaking of defendable, there's an interesting example the other day, just at Apple's WWDC conference. I guess they announced, I didn't even watch it, but a feature built into iOS that, or Apple Maps, I guess, offering turn-by-turn directions for hiking trails. And then people were all over the internet speculating that they just killed the All Trails app, which has raised $150 million. So, how much, and I even alluded to that in the presentation. There was an article about investors being hesitant about encroachment from the tech giants, which has sort of always been true. People have talked about that. How much will they encroach? But is that even more of a factor now?
So I think it's a no-go in our ICs if someone is saying it's not defendable against Google, because everything is not defendable in general. So that's what I mean by superpower. But there is often a superpower which sits on top of the use case, and we are looking for this kind of superpower, which then makes Google as a giant machine, let's say, not as a competitor going forward.
Just building on that. On that case, what we would look at is probably more niche segment. Obviously, you cannot compete with the huge one, but if you come with a niche, you can bring something interesting. That's where we could probably have a look.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I'm not entirely aligned, so it's interesting you asked that, because that's something we debate a lot in this. Is like, is OpenAI going to kill this, right? Obviously, future will tell us. But I actually think there is a lot of adoption where also companies will need help. Like, there's a lot. If you think about travel, there's a lot of specific integrations you need to develop, like into GDSs for rebooking. There's a lot of data. So I'm actually not one of the people thinking OpenAI is going to rule the world and there'll be no application layer. I think there's really space to help both consumers and corporates adopt AI. And obviously, you need to be careful that you're not just packaging the technology of someone else. But I actually think there could be really interesting application layers, middleware, where you can just help customers adopt, because there's a lot of questions. We talked also about regulation, doing things, GDPR compliant, and so I doubt that the big infrastructure plays will do everything. That's my
yeah, seems safe
view. Yeah.
And then how about that idea that AI can aid so much in development? Companies need less developers now. The idea of synthetic employees, who knows how far that'll go, but you may need fewer human resources going forward. So then will less funding be needed in the future? Will investors raise, smaller funds as a result? How would that all play out?
I think it's an interesting discussion. I see, let's say, the kind of efficiency gain we will all get out of it. And I think in terms of funding, there will be the next challenge coming going forward. Think about the compute power you need. Think about maybe satellites you need going forward. Or let's say, I think the story is not told yet. I think solving a problem on the customer care side or on the engineer side is good, but I think the next generation of innovation will have other challenges to solve.
Yeah, I can add to that. I actually think it's a great thing for entrepreneurs. If you look back, it's kind of the continuation, like the cloud. I think also remote work were big enablers, especially in Europe, right? It used to be like you need to have hardware, you need to be in Silicon Valley, right? Like that was how you innovate. Now you could be anywhere. There's a lot of SaaS tools. You can get started, in a matter of weeks. And so, if anything, I think AI is going to be yet another enabler where, like coding is going to be easier, and so you maybe need less people to. I think Sam Altman was talking about this like 1 billion company with 1 employee, which I think is more of a metaphor. But
we have seen it.
Yeah, I think it's certainly more of an enabler than anything. Yeah.
Yeah. How about how well travel demand has held up despite consumer discretionary spend in many other categories weakening? Does that make investors who don't normally participate in travel more interested, or do you think they just say, no, thank you, I'm not touching that mess?
Let me take this one. One real insight. We are seeing more and more big funds approaching us, saying that they are now very interested about travel. And I also see funds creating dedicated team for travel. I don't know if this is something you see. I know you have a lot of interest in travel, same. But last year when I was like sitting in the same room, I was trying to push travel as a very important industry, saying that it's 10% of the European GDP, 10% of every employment. I think now it's much more mainstream. I have less pushback from LPs when I'm trying to sell travel as the big industry to focus on.
Yeah, okay. We're almost out of time. How about travel technology in Europe? How would you describe how would you sum it up in just a single word? How would you describe the travel technology vibrancy that I think you all see here?
Leader.
Leader?
Yeah, I was going to steal Christoph's phrase earlier. Like a lot of the innovation has come from Europe. I think we're the largest hospitality market.
Just one word, 7 seconds.
Exciting.
Exciting?
Yeah. Nothing to add.
What is it?
Nothing to add. Exciting. Yeah.
Still 3 words.
Yeah.
All right, very exciting. Great. All right, thank you, Lucile, Bobby, Christoph. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.